And I'm Steve Finn, I'm the chair. So we have a couple items on our agenda tonight. At this point, I'll turn it over to our assistant superintendent to introduce our presenters tonight and our agenda.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, members of the committee, for being here and members of the public. We do have a very packed agenda. And the first item on our agenda is actually an AP textbook adoption recommendation. And that AP courses come with a very specific content that they're guided by and trainings. As a matter of fact, we don't write curriculum for AP courses here in Madison because College Board does. So we actually follow the College Board guidelines so we can then prepare students for the AP test and they can receive college credit with the criteria set forth on that test. So because of that, the textbooks that are offered for AP are a limited textbook selection that districts can pull from. And we follow our textbook adoption process in order to narrow down those textbooks. And I want to thank Peter Nye, who's our coordinator for 9 through 12, for being here tonight, but not only for being here tonight, but you might have recalled that we had this on a prior agenda and we pulled it back from that agenda because even though the department conducted a very thorough review, they actually wanted to take another look before it came to our committee and their recommendations. So I want to thank Pete and his team for the thorough job that they've done prior to coming here tonight.
Yeah, so I guess I'll take it from there.
Why don't you
Just from that topic, my job in this as the coordinator is to see to it that, the best possible version of the text that they may be selecting is available. So one became available in late December, but that text is not an AP text. So, and that AP text isn't going to come out for, well, I just wanted to delay it to see if that text was going to come out before we had this official process and we're going to go through it. So the purpose of my being here tonight is obviously this textbook adoption. We have a 12-year-old text. It's been a winning strategy. It's been a very functional text and the kids have responded well to it, but we have held out as long as we could because online support is no longer going to be offered for the older version of Give Me Liberty. So a couple of the reasons that I'm not going to read those, you can read those on your own, but there's improved review materials. There's adaptive practice questions. They actually have online video training now for primary sources where the kids are introduced to it. They have historians commenting on it and then move them into actually studying primary sources on their own. So there's these very new sources that are a big reason why we don't want to lose that online element to it. We found that this particular text is challenging, but it's approachable. That's a big, I teach an AP, different AP class, and some of the text can be very terse. This one is approachable, well organized and structured, which obviously is in line with an AP course that has to cover so much ground throughout the course of the year. But here's the big selling point for me was that, once it came to me, it was important to me that the narrative wasn't disrupted by the AP business. We wanted to make sure that the kids were being prepared for the AP, but we didn't want to disrupt them actually getting a US history course in the process. So this versus the other ones that we reviewed kept to the narrative and then parsed out the AP preparation and the activity. So when you get a chance to review it, you'll be able to see how that's organized, and I appreciated that element of it. So now, additionally on this slideshow, there's the process. I'm not going to bore you with that. You guys are probably may or may not be familiar with the way we go through that. It's somewhat exhaustive. We have people from different departments who are involved. We have student feedback, and there's a stack of papers that Gail can share with you if you want to look at the actual data and numbers that people assigned to each of the texts that we reviewed.
So we have them.
You have it. Great. That's great. So if you have at it, enjoy. So the selection that we have is Give Me Liberty. The use of the term liberty throughout the ages has changed, and that's kind of the theme of the book. And we always like the idea that we had this theme of liberty from colonialism, where You're looking at expansion as an idea of freedom, and then colonialism with, just the privileges of the rich to how we define freedom today and what it means to be American. So that's what we like about the text. So that's my introduction. If you have any questions, I'm going to leave these here. I could get extra copies too. I only had one copy. I thought about it on the way over here that, if we need multiple copies, I think we have a couple around the high school that they let us use, and I could drop them off on the way home.
So for our protocol, we leave a copy of the text in Sheila's office for any board member to preview at their leisure. So you can leave the text along with the recommendation, and then we bring it forth for a vote at our next board meeting. So you have enough time to look at it.
Is the addition new enough to cover some of the receding liberties since last spring?
Okay, it's a great question. One of the things that, once it comes to me to filter through, and I hope I'm going to answer your question. There are, when you look at the Patriot Act, the last text kind of went up through Obama, so some of those things were in there. But the way that it handles current events that might be a little more partisan is incredibly factual, and it's structured just like any other time in history. Even when you look at the Civil War, the way they did it, and I try to kind of measure that to see how that would play out. And I don't know if that answers your question, but
I would hope it would.
but I presented before, and one of the things that I always kind of use as a litmus test is this idea that, is it thought provoking or thought policing? So the idea of freedom is debatable, and how it's evolving in our current society is discussed in many of the videos that were online too. So it is interesting how it's changed.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember. I was a history major, so I'm going to dwell on this book for half a second. I'm old enough to remember when we had to change all our history books in the schools because of the fall of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, and so
Yeah, there are a few globes and maps floating around with the USSR on it.
yeah.
But I think we put those aside.
Thank you.
The balance between preparing for the AP test and, as you say, trying to have the narrative continue. With an AP history course, do we give up something as an AP class in terms of the students grappling with ideas and with each other around these concepts?
Yeah, I wish I had mentioned it because I love the question. That to me was the most important thing. Now, I don't teach AP US history course, but once the special ed teachers and the teachers that do teach it and the students that had taken it look through all the materials, it comes to me and I ask myself that question. If this were for my own children, is this giving them the thing that Horace Mann wanted for us, which is an educated population? What is the purpose of the American public school? But to make sure that we have an educated purpose, and defining what an education is at the heart of what US history is. So we can't just say, all right, we're going to take our AP kids and they're going to do well on the AP test, and then it's going to be rote. This is going to be a course where they're going to meet all those requirements of being an educated citizen. So that's why I think the fact that this book parsed those things out was important to me as a coordinator. So I hope that answers your question, but that was the biggest thing for me, honestly.
And on all these questions, like the post, I was reading through the post reading. Are there questions within the chapter to help students check their understanding? And are there questions within and at the end? It was no, whoever was the answer to that.
Yeah, so one of the things that's important to understand is that the purpose of us being here is that a lot of the online things are going to expire. And we do subscribe to those things. So there are, the idea that they said, I have to check where you saw that, but they're actually interactive, adaptive questions where kids will go online and they'll answer questions and then they'll get instant feedback, formative feedback from some of the online resources. So when you look through there, there are, I'm not sure who.
So this is like outside of.
The outside, but there are questions here too. There's AP elements in the book too. I'm not sure where.
Some of the.
Yeah.
The ratings of them.
Yeah, so someone putting that, there could be, I have to take a look at that,
Yeah,
but,
okay.
but I looking through the book, there's the classic questions at the end of the
Right. I
chapter.
remember also was yes.
Yeah, maybe there's multiple text there, some,
Yeah,
some of them-
it could be a different text.
Yeah, maybe-
Could be a different-
yeah,
Yeah, I just was looking for the,
yeah, Well, I
in order.
I appreciate you going through all of it.
Yeah.
I also like the fact that the text, apparently, according to the commentary and the materials we got, the text sets forth in the beginning of each chapter or each unit what you're supposed to be getting from each unit. I think that's really important because it probably took me most of my education to figure out that there's like, I'm not just reading a bunch of gobbledygook. There's stuff I'm supposed to be getting from this that helps you to focus on the key themes and stuff, especially for studying.
My response to that is that sometimes the kids will read those and still struggle with what the themes are, but it is important. And that's kind of our curriculum is written too, obviously.
Good questions?
And wonder if either you or Gail could speak just a little bit more to how comprehensive the textbook adoption process is, because we, for a whole variety of reasons. I think, the general public needs to have an understanding that, these aren't books just taken off the shelf or they just come up from a vendor, that this district takes the selection of its curriculum material, seriously. So, members of the committee have the paperwork and the checklist and everything else, and the general public generally, I think, understand how comprehensive that is. So.
Yeah, so we put that in the slide, so if that's airing, if someone's watching this online, they can take a look at that. But it is, we'll have obviously teachers in the department, but we'll have a teacher from special education who will also review the text, and then a handful of kids who will do it. And then again, I serve as a filter for all that. That's why there was a delay. I wanted to make sure that we had all our ducks in a row as far as the most recent updated book. But so if you're reading that at home, you get a sense of the several eyes are looking at these different books. And again, the AP has recommended texts that we're pulling from that have to be structured in a way that is acceptable for them. Additionally, this is an ECE course, so UConn typically is very flexible about what most of the texts that we're looking at they're going to be okay with. We're not. This is one of the most well sold texts in AP US across the country, regardless of the state. So anyway, that there's your outline that people can read.
And
I
this
would add to that we actually, 10 years ago, we worked mainly off of text. That was the only resource that we had for kids. And now we have very few textbook adoptions that we do, and it's mainly in either AP courses that we do textbook adoptions, or it's in a course such as you're going to see Mandarin Chinese text coming up, something like that. That is again very sequential with concrete kind of materials. So, but the vast majority of our curriculum is teacher created with multiple resources and materials that are curated, carefully to meet the objectives of each unit.
and this is actually a follow-up to the one that you've been using.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you knew that was successful.
I think Jimmy Connor said that you change a losing strategy and you keep a winning strategy. So I'm not saying that there was any bias. I think people went into it honestly, and the kids aren't different to it. In fact, many of the kids who might have reviewed it probably, I think there was a comment in there that you might find amusing about its use in the fireplace. So take a look at that. So there's very honest comments about it, but on the whole, I'm not nervous at all about the transition will be dirty.
It's also, one of the comments was, in addition to the throwing into the fireplace, somebody pointed out that it make a good, weight or something.
Right.
I do have a concern for all of our textbooks, that they're just so thick and so heavy and so hard for some of the kids to carry around. And it's really creating orthopedic issues for some of our kids. So I was happy to see, I did take notice that this one is entirely available online for kids, so they don't have to schlep that.
You'll see that more and more. And kind of the flip side of that is a yearly subscription. And as Pete had mentioned, they limit that subscription. So sooner or later in 5 years, you're going to have to go through another adoption. So it's another way to make sure that you're materials are kept fresh because they're gonna stop supporting that text. So we've seen that in a couple of different things, but in the next iteration of your next adoptions from world language, you're gonna see one text that's completely online. So like, well, according to our policy, they have to have access to the text and it's all electronic. So that does help with that, but on the other hand, it's kind of about budget planning.
Yeah.
Other ends. But this text, I can wholeheartedly say that there is not one living copy of that book that should be in this district still. It is well loved. Okay, if everybody's okay, I will make sure that that text is available for the board members to review at their leisure. Yeah, you can put it over there, it's great, and Sheila will have it in her office as well. I'm gonna take a closer look.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Pete,
you.
very much.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming back. Have a good evening. I'd like to invite Brown and
Yeah,
Paulson
no, I know.
teams onto the table.
There were no names for them.
Nobody doing anything but use the public, but
Good. Okay. So welcome to Principals Henderson and Arch, the H team. Thank you for being here this evening. This is a follow-up presentation to a presentation that I did to the entire board about the accountability index. I believe it was last month where we gave you updates about all the schools and the accountability index. And at that time, there was a request to follow up in this committee, giving you a little bit more detail and more overview about the plans that are in place for Brown and Polson in response to the accountability index. So that's the purpose of this presentation today, is to give you a little bit more detailed view. And I'd like to thank the leadership at both schools for really putting so much thought and energy into this, and also the staff at each building in doing the same, as well as the supports from special education. So thank you for being here as well. So I'd like to just start with like where we are at Brown and Polson and just kind of how we got here in terms of, you know, what it means. So there's 5 whole categories in the accountability index. And you are assigned a category based on your overall score. And then there's ways that you can move down a category as a penalty for something in that index. So generally, all schools are sorted into a 1 through 3 category, and then are moved down a category for a couple of different reasons. The reasons why Brown and Polson are considered category 4 is that each school, and that means brick and mortar school, not grade configuration school, had 3 consecutive years of data that indicated that students in a subgroup called high needs fell within the bottom 10% in a content area in math, ELA, or soon to be science in the state. And those 3 years of consecutive data really lead the school into a category 4 school, that then need to earn their way out of it by demonstrating 2 out of 3 years of growth with a high level of percentage of participation. So the high needs subgroup is defined as students in special ed, free and reduced lunch, and or EL services, English language learners. So they can be in any one of those categories or 2 or 3 of those categories. And those are called students considered in the high needs subgroup. So in huge districts, you might have hundreds of kids in the high needs subgroups. In smaller districts, it's any group that's over 20. So there's a big difference in moving the needle in that subgroup if you are a big district compared to a smaller district because of the relative size. If schools continue during the next cycle of identification for focus schools, which is this coming year, they would be re-identified in the next band. So that means either they're drawn out of a category 4 into a 2 or 3 or 1, wherever they're placed, or if they're not successful in getting that high need subgroup up above the state band, then they are placed in what's called a category 5 school. So this is a pivotal year for us. And I'll explain a little bit more about why. So this chart is to just give you an idea of where we've been and where we are today, both in the initial placement in the 1, 2, 3 group, as well as how we're dropped and then where we're considered in different categories. So the first year of Accountability Index was actually in school year 2018-2019. And if you look at Polson, you'll see that Polson received an overall accountability score of 69.1. which placed them in the initial category of 3 in that 1 to 3. However, they dropped to a level 4 in that year because of 3 years of limited growth in the high needs subgroup, in particular in English language arts. If you look down below that and you look at Brown School, the overall accountability score was 72.4. Their initial category was category 2 out of that 1, 2, 3. But they were dropped to a level 4 because of a 3-year limited growth in the high needs subgroup in the content area of math. So there are 2 different content areas in that high needs subgroup. Now, just something to keep in the back of your mind that really doesn't play into the accountability measures and the rules, but Brown was actually a different configured school than it is today, and so was Polson. So the grade levels were different than those schools served. But it doesn't matter because again, the number or the category is assigned to the brick and mortar school, not to the grade levels. So when we look at 21-22 score, you can see in both schools, they achieved a higher overall accountability score. So now Polson's at a 72.5. And now Brown's at a 78.2, both increases over that initial 2018-2019 score. That would place them both, if all things were like a clean slate, to be category 2s. They'd both be a category 2. So in fact, they both went up in overall accountability scores, and Polson also went up a category. However, when looking at the rules, the rule for now ongoing to get out of a level 4 or a focus school level, they have 1 year of credit for ELA for that high needs subgroup, but they need 2 years out of 3 years to get out of that category and go into the regular bands. And down below in Brown, they have 1 year credit for the high needs subgroup for math growth, but they too need 2 years out of 3 years. The difference between the two is that Polson would have, if again, they were recalibrated, they were categories 2s, Polson would drop to a category 3 for what's called an outlier achievement gap in content areas, ELA, math, science. And what that means is they take the difference between all students and students in the high needs subset, and they figure out the standard deviations. And if you're over 1.5 standard deviations from the state gap, then that would be considered a drop category. So it's a little mathematical statistically, but generally speaking, they would continue to be in the bands of 1, 2, or 3 categories. So now we're going to go into each building so you have a sense of what our areas of response were. So Dr. Cook and myself met with each building a couple times, and we really looked at creating the ability for the schools to respond in 5 major areas. Looking at this as a very important year for the schools. So we wanted to support our buildings with the reallocation of resources. We wanted to support the buildings with any training needs that they identified, with any student test familiarity, understanding that the Smarter Balanced Assessment is a very different assessment than other assessments that students are given, as well as an examination of standards and another band of response, which is accommodation determinations. So we're going to start off with Brown and then Polson. We're going to go into each of these categories. So this one really kind of is up close to Brown, and just really shows you that the pink boxes are boxes where the threshold was not met for the high needs subgroup. The pink boxes fell below the state threshold of that 10%. So you could see in mathematics, which was the Brown identified high needs area, that 2017 and 2018 were below the threshold. 2018 and 2019 were below that threshold. But then the first chance that we had to reassess our students during the pandemic, we pulled out the data for high needs subgroup, and just in-house in district, we estimated what our achievement level would be. And you could see that in that red box. So in most schools, we had a very good post-pandemic score year for high needs subgroup. However, the state did not count it because it was not part of the federal application. So it's an unofficial calculated result. I just want to underscore that. That's an unofficial number. And we did make our appeals to have that count. However, it was not honored that we couldn't do that. So you'll see that we have a +1 in 2021-22 for math. Brown indeed did receive high needs subgroup scores well above the bottom state threshold. So we have 1 year credit for 21-22. So again, the goal is 2 out of 3 years. We need to have this next year as another year of credit. And any questions so far about that? Okay, I think this is all kind of a repeat of information. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Henderson to go on and talk about those areas that are important.
Yeah, and this is a little overwhelming, but just kind of before we get to that, we go back. This is our 4th year as a 4 or 5 school. So the pandemic was the first year where we left in March. Obviously we didn't test that year. And then the next year, as Gail referenced, which would have been 2021. Again, we made the growth. We were fully in, deal with our cohorting and all the rest, but we were in school all year. And we didn't get credit for that year, but we did what we needed to do in the following year in 21-22. So we need to kind of just keep doing what we're doing. We haven't had a lot of turnover in staff. We haven't had really any turnover in staff. So we feel really good about that. But as we looked at the data and we looked at our plan, I'll share that in detail a little bit. We just wanted to go above and beyond what we've been doing. So I felt pretty good about where we were, but as we've met with talk about reallocation of resources, et cetera. But when you look at this chart, there's a couple of things. If you look at the bottom right, there were grade 5, 91.7. Is that the science? Yeah. It's amazing what 2 kids will do. We had 2 kids who didn't take the test, which kind of brings us down a little bit. What's that number, Gil, that we needed to be at?
95%.
95. So I know of the 2 kids whose family and their reasons, and so it's interesting because that's only 1 grade. When you do the whole school, obviously you have a lot more kids. So 1 or 2 kids can make a difference when you're only testing the 1 grade in the science. That's a little bit of an outlier. When we look at our absentee, and I know even just today, Shane in a data viz for us that gives us a lot of good detail about where we are this year. When we go back to there, we definitely had some post-COVID major absences last year. Just to address that, we meet twice a trimester with the nurse, school counselor, social worker, myself, when we go through each child. Some have long-term absences for whatever reason, still a little bit of COVID, but some other things that create absences for students. We make phone calls, send letters, so we're addressing that as best we can. And then, I learned a lot about the fitness test. Now, I've been doing this a long time. I learned a lot about the fitness test now that it ties into this accountability index. And Dr. Cook and I actually met with our PE department at Brown. You can only take the fitness test on 1 day, but you can do a lot of preparation work towards it. And so that's what we've kind of shifted. Our participation rate in that area went up tremendously. Again, post-COVID, we had some people who weren't, getting into PE. So last year, that number really went high. We really want to focus on the number of students passing all the areas. And so we have our PE department doing a lot more practice, because you can do multiple pre-tests. And then on the given day, you take that. So we're focused on that this year. And again, I think our meeting with our PE department has led them to approach that very differently. And we're going to do that final test later in the year. But in terms of the reallocation of resources, our math coach in particular working with small groups of students. Right now, our math coach, Stacy Dale, is working 4 mornings a week, 20-minute sessions with different groups of students. And this has been going on for a while. In the high needs subgroup who do not receive study center support, special ed support. And she's taking those resources and those tools and sharing them with the special education teachers so they can use them in their study centers for those students in special education. Last year, we saw great results, and then we did it this year with additional training. We've dedicated a paraprofessional to just deliver the tier 1 support in LA and math, and they're trained. That one person is trained by the math coach and the LA coach, and then they work with them for 6 weeks. Then we regroup students. Our data team meetings with core and special education teachers, we meet twice a week during the school day as a grade level department. I think we do the same thing, right? And once after school a month, looking at that. And again, that's this year, those data visits have been a huge help in looking at that data. And again, that just goes into our weekly after school meetings by department. We're committed to that time, looking at the data, identifying students. And this year, our PD for special ed and ELL, Michelle Horn delivered a workshop that helped familiarize teachers with the available resources, tools for teachers, and a lot of different information and data that's helping students help students prepare for the test better. We are not shutting down school and teaching to the test, but all of this is happening behind the scenes. We're doing more than we did in the past, but I'm confident it's not impacting our students in terms of their day. We're not SBACing them, but this is important. This is an important year, and we know that. In terms of the next slide, where are we?
That's good.
Right. Units are looked at. We're weaving those SBAC questions into assignments and assessments for all students. All students, including high needs groups, get 4 to 5 IABs. That's been consistent the last year. That isn't anything new. Someone said to me, "Oh, the special ed students don't take the IABs." They do, and they have.
Those are the
Practice.
practices in from assessment.
And then we have a 7-day plan leading up to the SBAC to review any additional materials with students. The tools, the question types, the technology. All of our staff, all of our teachers know who their high needs students are, and they've known that since the fall. So they're able to, in their, not just whether it's a special ed student or ELL student, they know who those students are and they know the work they have to do with them. And then changes have been made to specific accommodations for eligible students. I'm sorry, one slide back. We adjusted our schedule with a lot of good teacher feedback and coaches feedback and coordinator. We will have a 3-day week in May. I think it's May 9, 10, 11, where we'll go straight math on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, do nothing on Friday testing wise, and come back the next week with the 2 days of ELA and then the 1 day of science. Probably a longer window. And as you know, Kathy, after that we do makeups. So it does take a while. So but we've kind of spread it out a little more. We thought there was a little bit of test fatigue even last year with our students. And again, changes made to the accommodations, and I know Liz is going to talk a little bit about accommodations, but the list goes on. And sometimes you have to be careful. We talked about this already about all the things that might be out there. It might be too much. I met today with our school counselor, and we went over all the different accommodations that kids have right now. And it's, there's a lot of different things, a lot of settings, a lot of, but we're committed to a school-wide approach to making sure that the kids get the right accommodations, not all the accommodations, the right accommodations that they need to be successful. And I think there's a big difference there because you don't want to throw everything at them. It's overwhelming.
At this point, I'd like to ask the committee if they would like to pause for each school to ask questions, or if you want to wait for the conclusion of both schools' presentations to ask questions.
Between the schools.
Okay. Thanks. And,
Any questions from the committee? I have some questions. We looked at the 5 areas of response. I think half of them, I think, are very self-explanatory. Student test familiarity, it's just something that makes sense. To have them do their best work, examination of the standards. And accommodations. The first 2, reallocation of resources and training, I look at those from the standpoint of any kind of action plan. We kind of look at it as, if we do this, then we will get this. So, if on those aspects, when we're using math coach or paraprofessionals or the data team meetings with core and special ed, does that ultimately impact that we're changing either the amount of time these kids are getting with instruction, or the quality of the time, or the focus of the time? I'm trying to get the heart of what is that initiative and aspect trying to address.
I think the focus and the quality, not the amount. In other words, like when our math coach is meeting with those small groups for 20 minutes, different groups Monday, Friday, that's coming out of their math class. A teacher identifies with the coach certain kids that needs. So we're not taking kids out of, say, recess or PE and giving them more. I think it's more focused and more quality to your 2 descriptors.
So we're identifying this subgroup and saying they need additional support. They need either some additional time or more focused time, but it's a, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it's a strategic intervention with that subgroup.
Yes, because, for example, we're not doing that with the special education students who have study center with their special ed teacher. Because they're getting that with their special ed teacher. Right. Then about those other kids, you don't get that direct on a daily basis. And so it's happening weekly, once a week. But there's definitely strategy. There's definitely strategy in names and regrouping. And students who work with our paraprofessional in the tier 1, whether they move to tier 2 potentially, where they would go with the math interventionist, but after 6 weeks, they're not staying in those groups. So that they're regrouping and attention to detail in terms of every student being discussed and regrouped, not just a mass coverage.
I read that.
That's from my perspective, that's important information for us to have. I mean, this is the response. This is based on our best understanding how we're going after this issue.
Yeah, I think I would add too that, we're always, as a district, looking at increasing our repertoire. We're always trying to look at data to inform instruction. We're always trying to see impact according to our instruction. And we do that with whole groups of kids, but we also do it with small groups. So this idea of tier 1 intervention has always been there. Right. We've done that. We have beautiful data workbooks that every teacher and every principal and every provider can access that helps us to see where patterns might be forming and how we can jump in and intervene. But I think the idea of the math coach going in is not just working directly with kids, but also sharpening our repertoire and our toolbox of how to go forth with purpose, again, getting better and better at what we do. So it's not that we've never paid attention to small groups. It's that we have to really get better and better at it. And we have to grow our repertoire. And sometimes coaches work directly with kids. They're able to identify things that we should be catching in a different way. So it's not all bad, it's always good to do that. So
and I'll add our reallocation of our para professional to get trained. Came out of, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, like towards the end of the year, you know, we hired tutors. Because we knew kids had missed so much, and we were saying, hey, this is working for kids, you know, it's working for small groups of kids, individual kids, and we just kept that going with one power, but it came out of the tutor model that we did in the spring of.
That was during COVID.
Yeah.
So we took monies that we had, that would have been, for homebound instruction, since everybody was homebound. And, we hired college kids, usually are Daniel Hine graduates, and they came in and they graduated college and they did a final push to help our kids and to catch up. Which
That would have been in
showed in data
2021 year, right?
throughout both schools, yeah.
Yeah.
Wilson was filling.
So the implementation of these responses, what was the timing of that? Because, you know, you had mentioned that, you know, when you had data and some evidence that you're moving in the right direction already. So with that in line with this, is.
Yeah,
After that,
we upped it when we knew that when our appeal didn't go through, that other year we count, no. In the fall, you know, again, as our kids come back, we've been doing the tier one with the para, the start of the school year. Certainly, we were hoping to get that other year of credit, but you know, there's a lot of confidence in what we've been doing. So we don't want to throw that out, we've just been adding.
So I really was gonna focus this more towards Polson just because the age ranges of the kids, but it's probably fair to give it for both of you. Like, I know that some of the issue at the high school level, definitely there's a cynicism among the students, some students regarding testing, and it's not gonna help me get into college. I don't give a whatever. I know that filters back a little bit to the age range, you know, 6 to 8. So I'm wondering, especially at Polson, but also at Brown, are you doing anything to kind of address testing culture? And I mean, I think the 4th and 5th graders are still more, you know, excited to show what they know. But are there things that we can do that will change the culture about trying hard, being a team player?
Probably a little harder, 6-8.
Yeah.
A little easier here, but what we've tried to work on this year with our kids is, you know, the area of perseverance. Because for some of our students, you know, they look at this and right away, this guy can't do this. And so it's more of a confidence builder. We don't have the test, you know, cynicism at our grade level that you potentially get at higher grade levels. Now, last year we had high levels of participation, so our parent community supports that as well. So our bigger thing is helping kids persevere through maybe some tougher content and you know, time on task a little bit. I want to say, you know, sticking to it more than it is, you know, I'm not doing this kind of test, you know, like a little different. 6-8.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention the use of the coaches working with special ed. So often in schools, the coaches just work with regular ed. And I think it's so powerful to make sure we triangulate that work. And I love that that's happening. I know that has come up in the past. And so I just want to highlight that
As
again.
well as our yellow teacher.
Yes, oh
You
yeah.
know,
And
they become a team as well.
I love that. And I think that collaborative spirit really will trickle down to student achievement. I think it's great. The great use of resources.
So, Polson, has 1 year of credit as well. Their year of credit was actually pre-pandemic, 2018-2019, where they had a higher achievement than the state threshold. And again, our projections in 2020, 2021 would have given them a second year out of 3 years. However, that does not count that year. So this year we did not meet the threshold. We were slightly off. So again, this next year, the year for us to get 2 out of 3 years. So unlike Brown School, you can see that in Polson and math, they have actually no pink boxes, and it's really the ELA boxes that have popped in terms of content. So the next slide really shows you the overall index, and I'll turn it over to Principal Hart to talk about the overall index.
Thank you. And you'll hear some of the same things that you've heard from Frank. Why? Because we believe those strategies are going to work and make a difference. So in terms of this slide, again, the same type of thing, that we actually have two students from our high needs subgroup that made the participation box turn pink on us. But we're working on that with individual students and families as we need to. Like Frank said, we're focusing on the absenteeism of all students. We run reports every 2 weeks, and the school counselors meet with the students, and they have meetings with parents as needed throughout the year. We think that obviously will help all students, regardless of if they're in the high needs subcategory or not. We use our ESS clinicians as needed for this purpose as well. And we have a social worker who's been doing home visits for students with chronic absenteeism as well. I also have learned a lot about the physical fitness test. And as Frank said, what we're looking at now is they're taking sample tests and practicing where the students are actually setting health goals for themselves and working towards that. So it's more woven into what they do, regardless of what unit's being taught before they take the physical fitness test. In terms of the reallocation of resources, we have increased both the math specialist and one of the reading specialists there at FTE at Paulson, and that really is to focus on the small group instruction. They are put out their schedule and go into the classrooms and do push-in work with the teachers for both math and LA as well. They're working with small groups, supporting students who need it. Yes, in our high needs, but also if there's students who are still struggling in a different area, then they'll help them with that as well. We were splitting the special education coordinator, Kristen Skelly, between Brown and Paulson. She was reallocated to come to Paulson full-time, which has been a huge addition to us. And Mr. Pitt, in terms of your question with that, when I think of what difference did it make? Like, why did we ask for that, and what's the benefit? I'd say it's been huge and a big impact right from the beginning, because Kristen is able to work with the special education teachers on whether it's the goals and objectives that they're working on. She's a visible presence in study centers and going into inclusion classrooms, and really been not directly working with students, but supporting the teachers who are doing that work. So we've had a lot more time allocated to that and the support for the teachers in order to impact their instruction. We've also looked at our school-wide testing schedule, and this was in the past, the students would take their test when they went to LA. If it was first period, they took it first period. If it was last period, they took it last period. Same thing with math. And the feedback before we even got the results from the SBAC this year was that teachers would like to try a school-wide testing window. So stop the clock, and we've got a window starting at 9 o'clock. And then we have a block of about 50 minutes. We've got a break of about 15, 20 minutes, and then a second block. So we think that stopping the school will help promote a positive atmosphere, a climate for the test taking. But they're not going to hear kids walking to lunch or slamming their lockers in the hallway, because everybody will be doing it at that time. So I think that Seth also goes to your point of what's the climate like, the mentality behind it, that the importance is placed on it, but it's not the be all and end all.
So have we done this yet, or we're anticipating doing that?
We actually have a test on Thursday, because we also want to make sure that all of our students can access the Chromebooks at the same time on the Tide website. But the testing won't take place until May. So we have the schedule, it's ready to go. Teachers know about it. Yes, that's been ready since last summer, actually. So we have, and like Frank had said, we're doing an LA first, got a couple of days for that, then we're taking a break. The following week, we've got some days for the math, taking a break. It's not every day, but we also want to be aware of 2 days in a row, giving them that the mentality of I started it, now I've got to finish it, instead of giving them breaks in between like that. We think that that will be helpful as well. We have the joint data team meetings and team meetings, again, with everybody who's involved. We meet with them on a regular basis. We sit down, look at the data, look at all of the students, review who's making progress, who isn't, and we leave there with an action plan of who's going to do what by what date. So when we come back together, we actually have another meeting next week, being able to look at what happened, what the results showed us so far, what we're looking for. If so, what's our next step? And if not, what do we need to do differently? So there's that constant reflective practice from everybody who's involved. We have combined special education teachers used to have their own department meetings, and now we've integrated them during the school day that they'll attend the LA department meeting, they'll attend the math department meeting. So they're experts in special education, but they're also broadening their repertoire in terms of instructional practices based on the content areas. And again, we think that that's going to really help with the work that they do when they're pushing in for inclusion support, but also the work that they're doing in Study Center, specifically geared to goals and objectives for students with an IEP. We have the regular meetings. We used to have SST meetings that were discussed all of the students who we needed to an intervention. And now we've got them specifically for students who are English language learners. So that's meeting with Mary Beth Saar, meeting with the interventionist who might be servicing them, meeting with the classroom teachers as needed. And that's being built in all the way through since the beginning of the year. And again, it seems to be very effective.
You just identified that not all the board members may know what a SST meeting is.
Yes, thank you for that. So there are students where we look at the data, look at the performance, and we see if they're reaching the targets that we're looking for. It's sort of a meeting of the minds of people coming together and brainstorming, being able to strategize with how we support students. Frank alluded to going from tier 1 to tier 2 and up and down those tiers. That's where those decisions are made as a group. They're never made in isolation. So that's through that team approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've had various workshops. Gail has talked about making sure that what we're doing isn't in addition to, that it's woven into our curriculum as well. And I take that back. Some of the work is in addition to, but really it's about getting better at our practice. So some of those have been woven through with workshops with the coaches and the coordinators. Kathy, to your point as well, the coaches are working with special ed teachers as well as the general ed teachers. And we did start that last year in math, actually in 6th grade, and it was very well received and the teachers really appreciated it. So again, the word of mouth of teachers asking for that help is also very powerful. And then Kristen has also been very instrumental in this part of the writing the standard, begins helping the special ed teachers understand the standards for each different subject area and making sure that the goals and objectives are written for individual needs, but they're also grounded in our core curriculum. We started with the student test familiarity. We decided had to start with staff, and we had all of the staff, regardless of what they taught, take a practice test for the English language arts.
How do you do?
We need
It was fascinating. The feedback from them, we didn't score it, but they were realized how difficult the assessment actually is, and the type of questions, the number of questions. So in terms of the time that they would spend in task on the actual test, we looked into that. We looked at the stamina of what it takes, because I realized our curriculum, they may read a passage very much like an SBAC or a question or not, answer questions about it. But when we looked at the SBAC, they might be asking 6 to 8 questions about the same passage that we were only asking 2 or 3. So there were some minor tweaks that we could look at, including the vocabulary that they were using, the format of the assessments, and being able to see what does it look like. I'm a student and this is what I'm looking at. What are they seeing? So even now there's a common language between what a health teacher might be looking at in an open-ended response in her class, a student writing about a piece of art and connected back to what they're doing in language arts, because it's all teaching them good strategies that are across the curriculum. We are working, really focusing on 2 weeks before the unit, in addition to what's been woven through. Like Frank had mentioned with his content areas as well, we've been adding questions or tweaking questions, the format, the wording, the style, the type of response we're expecting from the students, simply to give them more practice with that. But right before the actual testing, we are going to be talking about time and task. We have been giving them some of their scores back, so they know, and they say they want to, like the middle school child, they want to beat their own target. So that's very motivating for them to be able to see their own success, which I think breeds more success following that. The IABs, the interim assessment blocks, we also do 4 or 5 per year. They're across various subject areas, but then our teachers will look and identify the top 5 questions that the majority of students have difficulty with. They'll teach into that, so it's a learning tool throughout the year as we go, so that students know, if I see this, I've had practice with it, and they know what it looks like. So that's been woven through both in language arts, math, science, social studies. They're now making their own questions, so the students really show that level of understanding on it, and seem to be really building confidence as much as the skills as well. And so I mentioned the special education teachers participating in bi-weekly department meetings. They're working together as a team as special education teachers, but also with the content areas. Coaches, just like at Brown, assisting the teachers with the tools for teachers. So knowing what's accessible, what's available, but also teaching the students the tools that are available. So there's a highlighting tool. You can cross out various answers like you could with paper and pencil, and eliminate answers as you go. So having the students know what is there and what's available for them and how to use that has been really helpful. And again, with the accommodations piece, knowing what meets each student needs. So we've had the discussions again through Kristen of, is it better for this student to take the assessment in the general ed classroom, or is it better for them to be pulled out? Why or why not? What accommodations do they really use on a regular basis, and that's what they get and what they need, versus giving them too many options that may then not be effective.
Just to give you an idea of all the accommodations, if you go to the next slide, so, and Liz, I'll have you jump in, and Kristen, these are various levels of accommodations for students, and it's a pretty extensive list. So Liz, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit.
Yep, so as you can see, there's lots of different options of things that are embedded or not embedded. And we want to make sure that, going along with what Catherine said, that we're giving kids, what they need and also what they use on a regular basis. The other thing is we want to make sure they're familiar how to use it with this program and tool, because using it for the SBAC may be different when you're using it on another assessment or evaluation. To make sure we're aligning all the assessments and getting them correctly, we have to actually go for all the specific accommodations and put them into the state system tied to make sure that students with 504 plans and special education have the ones that are aligned in their reports. And some of the special ones that we've requested in the past, such as print on demand, not only do you have to petition to the state, but you also have to have a conversation with them as well. And we have tried to work with the state and again, make sure we're getting what makes sense for the right student. One student really needed something in front of them. And at first we were looking at the print on demand, but then the practicality of that, and something's printed, then you're waiting and printing, then really what the child needed was something in front of them in a larger size text. So having it a booklet with larger print was the appropriate accommodation instead of that print on demand. So I think too, as we've started to use these different tools over the years, knowing what's out there and what's most appropriate to the student. But it's definitely kind of overwhelming if you see all those different options. Again, making sure we're using what's appropriate for the student.
Thank you. Questions regarding Catherine's presentation or the accommodations and the tools?
I just wanted to add, you know, we're running out of time, so I'll try and keep it brief. These really seem objectively to be very, you know, carefully thought out, well-developed plans, like you're taking it very seriously. And very much in the spirit of trying to overcome this focus list issue, which the board has expressed concern about as well. You know, I congratulate you for coming up with these creative responses and for being willing to be open-minded about doing it differently. And I would also invite you to consider continuing with these, even if we get off that focus list. It seems like it might be the right set of approaches to always ensure that, you know, all different cohorts of students coming through will do well.
Certainly.
And I just have one other comment really quickly. I focus a lot on human resources and how we utilize our people. And I just want to commend this group for the spirit of collaboration. Again, that it really is what creates healthy and productive schools. So thank you for working together and not in silos. And I think, Kristen, it's great to see that it's almost like you're like hybrid of you're using, like you're wearing your coaching hat, you know, and yet being administrative, which is great. And I think it's important to be able to do all that. And I feel like that really that it's a nice addition. So thank you. Thank you.
So we thank you for your presentation. I mean, I look at it and I go, you know, in the business of education, it's moving target all the time. And, you know, I hear much in what you're presenting in terms of the response that fits with what I'm sure we're going to hear in the full board meeting on special education. That, you know, there are things that CT says is driving that involve special educators working with regular educators and those bridging those meetings. And, you know, so, you know, I think the response and what you're doing is healthy, it's strong, it makes us better as a district, and, you know, and it will help us in those regards as well. So, you know, at this point in the meeting, we open up to public comment. Do we have anybody online? Anyone in-house who'd like to comment?
I just have one question, because I didn't know how all this was before 27, and then COVID hit. So, you know, what is the impact, and what can you tell me that you feel? Was that, do you think just a major contributing factor to this age group?
Oh, I asked.
Yeah.
We for years were close to the top of our Durgan, the Durgan participation. When we bring our students to the table and in what our staff has done for years, our serious test conducive environment, we've excelled. So our participation numbers went down.
I mean, it only makes
So
sense.
that's my opinion.
You know, I mean, and of course, the age also is hard.
The age, and obviously before that, I wasn't at Paulson,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
the first year that I was
I mean,
there
yeah.
with COVID.
I think there's been a considerable shift since 2017, 2018. About standardized testing and kind of creating space for kind of keeping that in a place that leaves the district in good standing. But also appreciating the mission of the district and the deeper thinking that also goes beyond standardized testing. So I would call it a recalibration.
Fair way to put it.
Barring any further questions or comments, we will adjourn at 6:35.
Thank you.
so much.